We are combining chapters 12 and 13. We will be looking at building the affirmative and negative case. Now, having some experience with this, you all may recognize some aspects you or your opponent did or did not incorporate within your first debate, and that's what this chapter is all about, building from our previous experience. More specifically, in this video, we will discuss the objectives for both the affirmative and negative position. Second, we will touch on the requirements for both the affirmative and negative for a proposition of value. Then finally, we will talk about the requirements for both the affirmative and negative for a proposition of policy. Let's jump into the objectives for each position. First, let's talk about the affirmative position. Now remember, the affirmative position, especially in a value debate, usually falls within the status quo, meaning that the proposition falls in line with ideas that already exist. For instance, the death penalty is legal in California, therefore the affirmative would take on that position, as it falls in line with already existing policies. Because of this upper hand, if you will, it is the affirmative's objective to establish a high degree of probability or burden of proof. Not to say that the affirmative has an easier position, but clearly there is reason to believe that the burden of proof is reachable to obtain, as the proposition already falls in line with current practices. Another objective of the affirmative position is to provide sufficient good reasons to justify the audience's or judge's acceptance of its position, as certain beliefs, values, or facts are justified. Next, let's move on to the objectives for the negative position. Now, seeing that the affirmative position must relay a burden of proof, the negative position must demonstrate a burden of rebuttal. Essentially, the negative needs to dismiss or argue against at least one of the issues of the affirmative to demonstrate that the status quo is questionable and demonstrates a need to change, whether it be in value or policy. Additionally, the negative, having the task to go against the grain or the already highly believed enacted proposition, must construct a coherent position to demonstrate a justifiable stance. Lastly, the negative must attack the case of the affirmative. Now, this might sound a bit confusing because for the first debate, I had you all write up your own brief, and both the affirmative and negative positions had the same outline for the brief and covered similar tasks, such as identifying key terms and discussing the proposition. Typically, in a face-to-face debate, and as we would move forward in the term, each position would have separate templates, as we discuss here, because each position has a different role. This is a brief layout of what this would have looked like. As you can see here, the first proposition or the affirmative takes on the role of introducing the motion, defining key terms, and so on. The first opposition or the negative position would deal with the proposed framework and immediately clash with the proposition's arguments, and so on, trying to simplify this process so that each student can, for the most part, work at their own pace and not synchronize meeting with group members or opponents through Zoom or video. We are going to be making adjustments to this layout just because it doesn't work with necessarily everyone's schedule, unfortunately. But for those of you who want an idea of kind of what an academic debate looks like, this is it. And it makes more sense to understand this so that you can kind of make sense of the objectives as well as the requirements for each position, because as you can see here, the affirmative and negative have different roles within a debate. Now that we have discussed the objectives for each position, let's discuss the requirements for both the affirmative and negative for a proposition of value, which is your next debate. Woo! So as we go through these, I want you to think about a proposition of value you would like to debate on and how you can phrase it as the affirmative. Now, typically, the affirmative is the status quo. Whatever topic you choose to debate on for your debate on value, you will take the affirmative position, as each of you will be introducing the motion. You're going to be defining the key terms as you did for the first presentation. You're going to set a burden of proof, and so on. So as we go over these, you may want to focus a little bit more on the affirmative position. First, let us discuss the requirements for the affirmative position in regards to a proposition of value. So first we have satisfactory definitions. We talked about this a few weeks ago. A reasonable definition of terms is necessary for any debate so that you, your opponents, and the audience has a clear understanding of what exactly is being discussed. Although I required that both the affirmative and negative come to agree with the definitions on terms, it is typically the affirmative's role in doing so. 2, provide satisfactory criteria. Criteria offers a measure of the values and a method of comparing competing values. Think about how you would, for instance, measure a term such as value. Being able to effectively communicate the criteria or measurement of a term could give you the upper hand. Provide application. Number 3. Application is the measure of effect in accepting the value or concrete implication of the value. You may demonstrate this through the use of qualitative or quantitative means. Essentially, the affirmative must implicate impact, whether it be on society as a whole or specifically the audience in itself, and this is demonstrated through our supporting evidence that we use. Number 4, prove the intrinsic. The affirmative must demonstrate relationships between certain elements of a case. This means that there should be logical connections embedded within the case itself. Number 5, demonstrate significance. Basically, there is no value to any debate if it does not prompt change or, at the very bare minimum, some sort of understanding. Whether it is related to value or policy, what's the point if the topic or information provided is not impactful to prompt meaningful discourse about something? Lastly, put the case together. As previously discussed, the affirmative takes on a heavy load as they are for a proposition and they are for the status quo. In regards to research, it is somewhat more of a smooth process in finding research that already falls in line with this proposition, giving the affirmative the task to put the case, in a sense, together, creating a manuscript, introducing the topic, and composing a brief. You all did this for the first speech, regardless of the position you were on, and this is what we're going to continue to do for the remainder of the term. So it's not going to be new information for you. It's not going to kind of be a new brief. The template in itself for the upcoming debates, they're going to be very similar in nature. It's essentially the same template. So moving on. Now let's jump into the requirements for the negative position in regards to a proposition of value. So first, attack topicality. When advocates argue what a matter is not, So when advocates argue that a matter is not topical, they maintain that it is not related to or does not directly stem from the proposition being debated. In other words, the negative is For a debate on value, the attack on topicality would consist of attacking the affirmative definitions, because although we initially may agree on a definition from an online source, the definition comes together through the debate to demonstrate the affirmative's interpretation of the concepts and for the proposition as a whole. So attacking the topicality can weaken the affirmative's position. Number 2, attack criteria. The negative should offer reasons the criteria initially presented is flawed. This means that the negative can demonstrate other criteria as being more important or completely demonstrate that the criteria is flawed in itself. Number 3, we have an attack on the significance. The negative's objective is to minimize the significance the affirmative presented and prove that at least some of the essential elements of the affirmative's case are not significant to justify any type of change. Number 4, we have attack uniqueness, demonstrating that what the affirmative